of the shadows, bound for the gallows, a dead man walking, till love came calling. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. 6 feet under, I thought it was over, and answered a prayer, the voice of a savior. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. All at once I came alive, this beating heart, these open eyes, the grave let go, the darkness should have known. You're still rolling stone, you're still rolling stone.
Hi,
We're the Pranglies.
Shelley,
Haley,
Logan,
Emma.
Greg.
we're from Brantford.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Patty Lamont.
And I'm Adrian Lamont, and we love going to Paris Presbyterian Church. So we'd like to welcome you this morning.
Hello everybody, my name is Diane and I got the candy.
Hello everybody, my name is Joel and I do not have candy.
Hi everybody, my name is Melissa.
And this is Elijah, and this is Alexandria.
And they both
Hi
have
to everybody from Port Dover.
Hi guys.
Hi guys and bye.
Welcome from the Leach family from Princeton. I'm Mike.
I'm Chloe. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Angela.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, we're the Grahams from Air. I'm Ella.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Aiden. Welcome to the service today. Whether you're from Paris, Air, or any other place, we welcome you.
I wanted to give you 3 real quick, exciting updates for the life of our church. This past week, you heard the announcement likely from the government, which means we are going to now be able to open up once again for in-person gatherings. And so that means that this coming Sunday, February 21st, we can host in person as well as online. If you want to get more information, just jump on our website. But for those of you that are not comfortable coming back yet, or just simply not able to come back, understand that we're going to continue to stay online. We are committed with this. It's been amazing to see what has been happening, which actually brings us to our second exciting announcement. As many of you would have received an email on the weekend letting you know that we are actually going to begin hiring a staff position to take our online ministry to the next step. It's been so amazing to be able to connect and with you and different people in different places, and we want to continue to see this happen. And so we're going to give more information as it comes. Now listen, if you want to hear some of these exciting updates and you want to know more information, connect with me by sending me an email and we'll get you on our regular distribution. Real exciting. Third one is, some of you may know that Lent is beginning this coming week. Now, Lent is the 6 weeks before Easter, where Christians, in many traditions, will use it as a time to prepare and focus upon Jesus as they get closer to celebrating Easter. Sometimes people will fast. They'll give up alcohol or chocolate or, get this, even social media as a means of preparation. Well, we thought we want to do Lent together as we focus on Jesus with one another. And so every week, we're going to present a different theme, something that we can be intentional about in terms of living out our faith and focusing on Jesus as we do it with one another. And so we're going to be sending out a weekly email. Again, if you want to get that information, send me an email. Love to connect with you. We'll be talking about it online, at our services, and in person. We'll be posting videos to YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, so continue to follow us there as well. And we'd love for you to get involved by posting things with the hashtag LentTogetherPPC. So this week, the first theme is that of love. This week, we want to show some love as we focus on Jesus. One of the things that Jesus said so often about was love one another. And so you be creative. I know you can do this. Maybe write words of encouragement. Maybe drop off a care package. Maybe buy someone a gift unexpectedly. Just show some love in a way that we focus on Jesus. Well, it's great that you are joining us this week. Let's jump into some of the music now as we continue.
I just wanna be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I just wanna be a sheep, ba, 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just wanna be a sheep, ba, ba, so sad, you see. I just wanna be a sheep. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just wanna be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. When we were lost once, you were the shepherd that carried us home. When we were prodigals, you ran to meet us with open arms, and we can't hold back our praise. When we were refugees, you were the one who took us in. When we were enemies, you paid the price for all our sin, and we can't hold back our praise. This is the sound of adoration. Oh, how we love Jesus, we love you. Are the joy of all creation. Oh, how we love Jesus, we love you. You are the risen one. You conquered death and made a way. You sang our freedom song. Now we are dancing on our chains, and we can't hold back our praise. This is the sound of adoration. Oh, how we love Jesus, we love you. Are the joy of all creation. Oh, how we love Jesus, we love you. By the cross, I am free. Your grace changes everything. I was blind, now I see. Your grace changes everything. By the cross, I am free. Your grace changes everything. I was blind, now I see. Your grace changes everything, everything. This is the sound of adoration. Oh, how we love you, Jesus, we love you. You are the joy of all creation. Oh, how we love you, Jesus, we love you. This is the sound of adoration. Oh, how we love you, Jesus, we love you. You are the joy of all creation. Oh, how we love you, Jesus, we love you.
So this week we're continuing our series called Seeing the Big Picture. Now, if this is your first time joining us, first of all, welcome. It's great that we're able to connect this way. It's a series that for the last number of weeks we have been walking through the Old Testament, kind of at a high level view to help us ultimately understand what is the Bible all about. And if you've been joining us, we come back week to week to this one reality. It's about relationship. It's about us being in relationship with God, of God out of his love choosing to live with us and wanting us to make that choice to walk with him in the midst of all of life. And so every week we tried to jump into this in real kind of tangible ways, looking at different individuals in the Bible as to how they walked in relationship with God. Now I recognize we cover a lot of ground. We cover entire books of the Bible. Actually today we're going to probably cover about 4 different books in the Old Testament. And so we realize that you might have questions. You might want to follow up a little bit more. And so I don't know when you're watching this, but if you are watching this on Sunday at 11:30, we jump on for live Q&A. Link is in the description. You can join us. You can make comments. You can ask questions, or you can just simply sit back and listen. This week, we're going to pick up from where we were last week. You may remember last week we were first introduced to the person of Moses and the situation of God's people, the nation of Israel. They were in dire straits. They were in Egypt in slavery, complete bondage. And God heard their desperate plea. And he delivered them through the leadership of Moses, saved them from the bondage of slavery. And they were now going to begin this journey into the wilderness, into the desert, to this promised land, fulfilling a promise that had been made hundreds of years ago to Abraham. When God says, I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'm going to bring you into the new land. Well, the journey was about to begin. And so that's what we're going to jump into here today. This journey into the wilderness, into this land of great promise. And if you've ever gone on a road trip, you know there's a sense of anticipation, there's a sense of excitement, but you also realize that there's sometimes a few hiccups along the way. And so as we turn to Exodus chapter 16, we're going to see how did this journey begin and what was the first hiccup they came across. Verse 1, we read this. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the 2nd month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. I have to admit, when I was rereading this passage over and over this past week, I had a bit of a chuckle, a bit of a smile to my face. Because anyone who's ever gone on a road trip, particularly with kids, can kind of appreciate what is going on here. Essentially, Moses is beginning a road trip with about 1 million people. So this is no small task. And the very first complaint they had was what most parents hear from the backseat of their car when they go on a road trip. I'm hungry. I want something to eat. Like, they are barely into this journey. They have seen what God has done. And the first thing they do is they begin to complain. But it then opens up this really interesting conversation where God says, I am going to provide for them. Every day. I'm going to provide enough food for everyone to eat. But here's the key. Moses, tell the people that they are only to gather what they need for that one day. Don't stockpile. Don't get more than you need. Just enough for that one day. Because what God was doing was essentially saying, I am going to test them in this to see if they're actually going to listen to me. I so appreciate this because this is the reality of something that is so significant. Something that we begin to see as being crucial, not only to our relationship with God or God's relationship to Israel, but in every relationship. A key piece, obedience. You know, oftentimes when we think about relationships, whether it's with your spouse or whether it's with your kids or your parents or your friends or your colleagues or your boss, one of the key ingredients we often overlook, but is so incredibly necessary, is that of obedience. You see, obedience in many ways is the actions that actually indicate, do we trust someone? Do we respect someone? Do we truly love someone? In such a way that we are going to act in a way that is respectful to them. I think the very same thing is true when it comes to our relationship with God. Obedience is so key. Oftentimes, maybe you come across the place where you look at the Bible or you look at the things that are being taught and you think, why all the rules? Like, can't we just talk about God's love? But as we work through this today, I hope we begin to understand the significance, the importance of obedience. Well, how did Israel do? I mean, God basically said, I'm going to provide for you. I want you only to gather what is needed for that day. God is like, listen. Don't get too far ahead of yourself. Don't try to take more than you need. Just take what is necessary for the day. It's kind of like a modern day equivalent of like as a parent saying, listen, here's the deal. I am going to cook for you. I'm going to provide food for you. But all I ask of you is just clean up the dishes at the end of the meal, right? Like, I'm going to do this for you. Will you do this for me? Like, it's not a huge ask. Not a huge ask. But there's something significant going on. So, how did Israel do? Well, we jump back into the passage. And in verse 19, we read this. Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. By then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was angry with them. The Lord asked Moses, how long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? Do you see what happened? God asked them to do one simple thing. Only take what you need for that one day. Like he's not asking them to walk on water. He's not asking them to turn stones into bread. He's saying, listen, don't be selfish. Don't take more than you need. Take what is necessary for the day. In many ways, it's God saying, are you going to trust me? Are you going to see that I'm going to provide for you day after day after day? And they couldn't even get it right. You may be wondering, like, why am I banging on this point over and over again? Like, it's a small detail. So the food rotted. What was the big deal? But as I think we all know, when we fail to obey in the small things, it begins to bleed into all of life and begins to influence, oftentimes, the larger decisions as well. As we turn to the story of the nation of Israel wandering in the desert, what we begin to see over and over and over again, their inability to do what God asked them to do. A number of examples we could give, but I'm actually going to jump in another book of the Bible. I'm not going to read it, but just kind of paraphrase it for you. It's Numbers, the book of Numbers, and it's chapter 12 and 13. That while they are still wandering in the desert, God actually says, I want you to send 12 spies, 12 scouts ahead to check out this promised land that I'm giving you. And then I want them to come back and report to you. Well, these 12 men go away for 40 days. And when they return, they basically tell two things. The first thing is, this land God promised us is amazing. It is as good as he said it would be. You would think that would start to stoke the excitement. The problem was the next thing they said. There's people living there, and they are big, and they are strong, and they are powerful, and there is no way we're going to be able to conquer this land. And then suddenly the rumors start to spread. This was a bad idea. We should go back to Egypt. We should get rid of Moses. This is a bad idea. There was only 2 out of the 12 who actually said, we can do this. God has said we can do this. We need to obey and step into the promised land. But they refused to go. And as a result, God said, because you didn't obey, because you didn't believe, because you didn't trust, you're now going to wander in the wilderness, not for 40 days, for 40 years. Did you ever wonder why it took Israel so long to get from Egypt to Canaan? It's not because it was a long distance. it was because of their inability to obey. It's because of their disobedience that they began to wander in the wilderness. Now, from a distance, when we read this type of a story in the Bible, we may think, man, God, why are you being so harsh? Like was one mistake. But as you start to read more and more the story of the people of Israel, you see that this was more of a trend in their life, of how their inability to follow in the ways of God was more their trademark move. We also see it as the Bible highlighting for us again the importance of obedience. That it's not enough for us just to simply to say, I believe in God. I believe in the Bible. But rather, do we begin to obey? As you start to read through the Bible, very first book is Genesis. Then the next four, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They're all 4 books of the Bible that deal with these 40 years of the nation of Israel wandering in the desert. But there's something more significant going on. Maybe you've read some of these books and you're like, this is a lot. There's a lot of rules. Seems kind of weird. Leviticus, in my opinion, is probably the most least read book in the Bible. Because there's like strange rules and rituals, and you think, what the heck is this even doing in the Bible? Like what is the purpose of it? But when you begin to pull back and see the perspective of what God is doing, He is essentially shaping a nation. That He is putting into place rules for them so that they know how to live. Oftentimes we think, well, if God just loves him, He would just kind of figure it out. But is the loving act just simply to free the nation of Israel and then bring them into the promised land and say, hey, you know what? You guys kind of figure this out on your own. Think of your own family. Either the family you're in right now or the family you grew up in. Let me ask you a question. Was it just a free-for-all? Did your parents or do you as a parent just simply say, hey, listen, out of my abundance of love, I just want you to hang out in my house. You can eat my food. You can live under this roof. You can do whatever you want. Don't tell me where you're going. Don't tell me when you're leaving. Don't tell me what you're up to. Don't do anything that you don't want to do. Just live your life. Like, come on. You don't do that, right? My kids are like shaking their head right now thinking that's not the reality for us, right? We have rules. Why? Because rules enable us to relate to one another. Rules enable us to kind of live together with one another. The absence of rules doesn't mean that we love someone any more. And I think this is the reality that we see with the nation of Israel. That God is giving them these rules so that they can begin to live life with Him. But there's also a second reason, and that is that they will be set apart from every other nation. You see, God didn't want them simply to live as the Egyptians lived or to live as the Canaanites lived. He wanted them to live differently so that people would begin to take notice that something was up. And in the way in which they lived, the way in which they followed these rules, it began to point them to God. As you read through the Bible, you see this play out over and over and over again. God desires relationship. And it's within that relationship, God sets a framework because He desires us to live the best way. The question is always this: will we choose to follow? Will we choose to follow? So, what does this begin to look like? What does this start to mean for us in terms of our relationship with Jesus? Oftentimes we speak of Jesus' great love for us. But listen to what Jesus has to say. In John 15, we read these words, verse 10. He says, when you obey my commands, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you these things so that you may be filled with my joy. Jesus says, if you love me, you're going to do what I ask you to do. Now, this week I've been thinking a lot about my role as a dad and how I have rules for my kids. And there's rules sometimes that they may not always like. There's rules that they may not always agree with. But I hope they understand that the rules I give to them is not to intentionally make their life difficult, not to sap the joy and the excitement out of life. But the rules are there out of my love for them, wanting what is best for them. Now, I'm flawed. I make a lot of mistakes. But my motivation is always one of love. Now think of God. He is without flaw. He is without mistake. But his rules are not to sap the joy out of life, but rather to allow us to truly live life in the way that he desires for us. The question is, how will we respond? You see, oftentimes the response can be negative in two ways. You see, we make it all about the rules. We fail to recognize the relationship, and we just follow the rules to the letter of the law. There's a group of religious leaders in Jesus' day. You may have heard of them, the Pharisees. And they were the best at following the laws. But guess what? They followed the laws so much they missed the relationship. They actually followed the rules so well, they missed when God showed up in Jesus. Sometimes there's that trap for us. We make our faith all about the rules, and in doing so, we miss the relationship. On the other side, the other danger is we suddenly think it's all about me. That I'm only going to follow the rules that kind of work on my end, that aren't too difficult, that aren't too much. And in the same way, we miss Jesus as well. And so what does this begin to look like for all of us? What's our takeaway? There's a phrase that's often used within the church, talking about having Jesus as your Savior and your Lord. Two words that I think we need to understand and to grasp if we want to hold this relationship with God together. Jesus as Savior speaks of how he is the one who saves us. It's not the following of the rules. It's not our goodness. It's rather the greatness of God in Jesus that saves us. But it also means that when we declare Jesus as our Savior, we also follow him as Lord. Now, Jesus as Lord means to me that you have the right to tell me how to live in the midst of all things. So this week, as you think of your relationship with Jesus, as you think of the reality of how he wants us to live, take some time to reflect. Reflect on three things. On how you are obeying God in the midst of all of life. I think back to the example of the nation of Israel. The very first ask was listen, this day, just only gather enough food. Ask yourself this: how are you in the day-to-day decisions obeying God? It doesn't have to be in the monumental decision, but just in the simple, ordinary ways. How are you obeying Jesus this day? Because it's obeying him in the small things that enables us to follow him in the greater things. Second thing to consider is then when you come to these bigger decisions, like when God told the nation of Israel to go into the promised land, and it seemed hard, and it seemed difficult, and it seemed beyond them. Maybe you have a decision in your life that seems way too much. And you're praying about it, and you're kind of sitting back. But what God really wants you to do is obey and step out in faith and trust in Him. And then the third thing is actually begin to understand what God wants for you. I mean, as I was working through this message this week, I was thinking, what are some of the practical takeaways for us? A great place to begin, if you want to go to a next step, is read Matthew chapter 5 to 7. It won't take you long, but there's so much to work through. Jesus talks about how do we obey Him when we're struggling with anger, or when we don't want to forgive, or what does it mean to obey Jesus when it comes to giving, or when someone mistreats us. It's all in there. Take some time this week to read through Matthew 5 to 7 and begin to see what's a practical way, what's a tangible way that you can begin to obey Jesus. Because Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey me. And when you obey me, you will begin to experience incredible joy. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to close with prayer, but maybe you got questions, maybe you got comments. Jump on with us for Q&A, 11:30. Let's pray together. And so, Jesus, we again give you thanks for this day. We give thanks for just having the Bible again as an example of how you have called us to live. Yet, Jesus, if I'm being honest, I know in my own life, and perhaps those watching in their lives as well, there are times when we fall short. There are times we know what you ask of us, we just fail to do it. Maybe it's in the small things, or maybe it's in the greater things. Help us, Jesus, this week to show our love, not just simply with the words we speak or the thoughts we think, but in the actions we take. To step out and to follow you in obedience in the midst of all of life. We ask it, Jesus, in your name. Amen.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where